Your soulmate wrote a secret love letter that expires in 5 minutes, and the reason it feels so urgent is because the words they finally wrote down were never meant to stay hidden forever, yet for a very long time they believed silence was the safest place to keep them. The letter did not appear suddenly out of impulse or temporary emotion. It was formed slowly, almost quietly, inside their mind long before it was ever placed on paper or typed into a message. For months, maybe even longer, there were thoughts they carried about you that they never allowed themselves to express openly. Sometimes those thoughts arrived late at night when everything around them was quiet and distraction was impossible. Other times they appeared during ordinary moments in the middle of the day, when something small, like a memory, a familiar phrase, or a passing idea, reminded them of the connection you once shared. In those moments they often felt the urge to reach out, to tell you something honest about how they truly felt, but each time hesitation followed closely behind. Hesitation is powerful in that way. It convinces people that waiting is wiser than speaking, that silence is safer than vulnerability, and that time will somehow solve emotional questions without requiring any action. Your soulmate believed that explanation for a long time. They told themselves that if the connection between you was meant to continue, it would eventually return naturally without effort. They believed that speaking too soon or saying the wrong thing might create awkwardness or push you further away. Because of that fear, they placed their feelings in a quiet corner of their heart where they could exist without being exposed. But emotions rarely disappear simply because they are hidden. Instead, they grow stronger in the background, waiting for the moment when honesty finally becomes unavoidable. The letter they wrote now is the result of that moment arriving. Something inside them shifted recently, something that made it impossible to continue pretending that the words they had been carrying did not matter. Perhaps it was a realization about how quickly time passes and how easily opportunities to speak honestly can disappear. Perhaps it was a moment of reflection when they suddenly understood that leaving important feelings unspoken can become a regret that follows someone for years. Or perhaps it was simply the awareness that the connection you shared left a deeper impression on them than they ever allowed themselves to admit. Whatever the exact reason, the shift was strong enough to break through the hesitation that once kept them silent. Once that hesitation began to fade, the thoughts they had been holding inside started to form into sentences. At first the process felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. Writing honestly about feelings that had been hidden for so long requires a different kind of courage than simply thinking about them privately. Each sentence forced them to look directly at memories they had tried not to revisit too often. They remembered conversations you once shared, moments when laughter came easily, and times when serious topics revealed a level of understanding that felt rare and genuine. Those memories did not feel distant when they revisited them. Instead they felt vivid, as if they had been quietly preserved beneath the surface of everyday life. As the letter continued to take shape, your soulmate realized that what they were writing was not simply a collection of nostalgic memories. It was an acknowledgement of something real that had existed between you. The connection you shared may not have lasted in the way either of you once imagined, but its influence remained present in subtle ways. It shaped how they think about emotional honesty, how they recognize meaningful conversation, and how they understand what it feels like to be genuinely understood by another person. These realizations made the writing process more intense than they expected. Each sentence felt like a step closer to revealing something deeply personal. At the same time, there was a sense of relief in finally allowing those thoughts to exist outside their mind. When feelings remain unspoken for long enough, they can begin to feel heavier than they actually are. Writing them down removes that weight, even if the words are never read by anyone else. Yet the letter they wrote was never meant to remain hidden forever. The reason it feels as though it expires in 5 minutes is not because love itself has a time limit. It is because courage can be fragile. Moments of emotional bravery often appear suddenly, and if they are ignored too long, hesitation can return just as quickly. Your soulmate knows this. They understand that the act of writing the letter was only the first step. The next step, sharing it with you, is the part that requires even more courage. When someone reveals their true feelings, they also expose themselves to the possibility of misunderstanding or rejection. That possibility is what made them silent for so long in the first place. Yet now they feel something different. The thought of never expressing what they wrote feels heavier than the fear of how you might respond. This realization is what gives the letter its sense of urgency. It represents a moment when honesty has finally become stronger than hesitation. Your soulmate understands that you may have moved forward in your own life since the last time your connection felt close and immediate. They know that time changes people and circumstances in ways that cannot always be predicted. The letter they wrote is not an attempt to control the future or force something to return exactly as it was before. Instead, it is a sincere effort to replace silence with truth. For a long time they believed that avoiding emotional vulnerability was the safest way to protect both of you from confusion. Now they are beginning to see that silence can sometimes create more confusion than honesty ever could. By writing the letter, they are choosing to acknowledge what the connection meant to them rather than pretending it was insignificant. They are choosing honesty over assumption, courage over hesitation, and truth over the quiet uncertainty that has existed for so long. That is why this letter feels like it carries a time limit. Not because the feelings themselves will vanish in minutes, but because the moment of courage that inspired the words deserves to be honored before doubt has the chance to silence it again. As the words of the letter continued to grow, your soulmate began to feel the full emotional weight of what they were finally allowing themselves to say. For a long time they believed that keeping certain feelings hidden was the safest way to move forward. Silence felt controlled, predictable, and less risky than revealing something deeply personal. But while writing, they realized that silence had never actually erased the emotions they carried. It had only pushed them into the background where they quietly influenced their thoughts without being acknowledged openly. The process of writing the letter slowly brought those hidden emotions to the surface. Each sentence felt like uncovering something that had been waiting for the right moment to be recognized. At first they hesitated even while writing, stopping to reread certain lines and wondering if the words were too honest or too vulnerable. Yet every time they tried to soften what they wanted to say, they felt that familiar sense of unfinished truth returning. It reminded them that the purpose of the letter was not to protect themselves from discomfort, but to finally express what had remained unspoken for so long. As they continued writing, memories of the connection you shared became clearer in their mind. They remembered the early conversations that felt surprisingly natural, the moments when laughter came easily, and the times when deeper discussions created a sense of understanding that was difficult to explain. Those memories were not exaggerated or romanticized. Instead they felt grounded and real, which made them even more meaningful. What stood out most was the sense of emotional comfort that existed between you. With many people, conversations remain on the surface, but with you there was often a willingness to explore thoughts and feelings that were usually kept private. That openness created a kind of trust that stayed with them long after the connection changed. While writing, they realized that the letter was not simply about expressing affection. It was about acknowledging the significance of that trust and the way it influenced how they now view meaningful relationships. Another realization followed closely behind this one. They began to recognize that much of the distance between you had grown from hesitation rather than a clear decision to walk away. There were moments when they considered speaking more honestly about what they felt but convinced themselves it might complicate things. At the time, they believed that giving the situation space would allow clarity to appear naturally. But looking back now, they see that waiting often replaced communication instead of supporting it. Waiting turned into silence, and silence slowly became the explanation for why the connection seemed to fade. This awareness brought a mixture of regret and understanding into the letter they were writing. Regret because they now see how many opportunities for honest conversation were missed. Understanding because they realize that fear of vulnerability is something many people experience when a connection begins to feel truly meaningful. The more the letter developed, the clearer it became that the feelings they were describing had never been as temporary as they once believed. Even after time passed and life continued moving forward, the memory of the connection remained present in subtle ways. Sometimes it appeared when they were having a conversation with someone new and noticed how rare it was to feel truly understood. Other times it surfaced when they experienced something that reminded them of a moment you once shared together. Those reminders were not constant, but they were strong enough to reveal that the connection had left a lasting impression. Writing the letter allowed them to see these patterns more clearly than before. They understood that the emotions they carried were not about returning to the past exactly as it was. Instead, they were about recognizing the value of what existed and allowing themselves to speak honestly about it. This is why the moment of writing feels so urgent to them. Courage often arrives unexpectedly, and when it does, it can disappear quickly if hesitation returns. The idea that the letter expires is not about love fading in minutes. It reflects the fragile nature of emotional bravery. Right now they are in a moment where honesty feels stronger than fear, and they know that if they wait too long, doubt may convince them to hide these words again. That understanding is what gives the letter its quiet sense of urgency. They know that sharing these thoughts with you may lead to uncertainty or even rejection. But they also know that leaving them unspoken would mean continuing to carry questions that might never be answered. For the first time in a long while, they feel ready to accept whatever truth might come from speaking honestly, because living with unanswered feelings has begun to feel heavier than the risk of revealing them. As the letter continued to unfold in front of them, your soulmate began to experience something they had not allowed themselves to feel in a long time. Complete honesty with their own emotions. Writing those words forced them to slow down and examine feelings they had kept hidden beneath routine and distraction. For months, maybe even longer, they had been moving through life with a quiet belief that whatever once existed between you had naturally settled into the past. It was a convenient explanation, one that allowed them to avoid asking questions that might not have easy answers. But the act of writing the letter began to challenge that belief piece by piece. Each memory they described and each thought they expressed revealed how much of the connection had remained alive in subtle ways. They started to recognize that the reason the words felt so intense was because they were not new feelings at all. They were feelings that had simply never been spoken out loud. As the sentences grew longer, they began remembering the moments when the connection between you first started to feel meaningful. It had not happened instantly. At the beginning, your conversations may have felt casual or light, just like conversations with anyone else. But gradually something different emerged. The discussions became deeper, more thoughtful, and more honest. There was a level of curiosity about each other's ideas and perspectives that made talking feel natural rather than forced. You both seemed comfortable sharing personal thoughts without worrying too much about being misunderstood. That kind of openness creates a rare emotional space where people feel safe enough to be authentic. While writing the letter, they realized how much that sense of authenticity had influenced them. Even long after the connection changed, they continued to value that kind of honesty in their interactions with others. Yet they also noticed that the depth you shared was not something they easily found again. The more they reflected, the clearer it became that the connection had shaped their expectations of meaningful communication. It had quietly raised their standard for what emotional understanding feels like. This realization added another layer of emotion to the letter. It was not just about expressing affection or recalling memories. It was about acknowledging how the experience with you had influenced their personal growth. There were things they learned from that connection that continued to affect the way they approached relationships, conversations, and trust. Recognizing this made them appreciate what you shared even more than they did when it was happening. At the time, the connection simply felt natural. Now they could see how rare it was. As the letter moved forward, they also began confronting a difficult truth about their own hesitation in the past. They remembered moments when they sensed that the connection was becoming important but felt unsure how to respond. When emotions become meaningful, vulnerability becomes unavoidable, and vulnerability can feel frightening. Instead of speaking openly about what they were feeling, they often chose to remain careful and reserved. They worried that saying too much might create pressure or make things complicated. Looking back now, they understand that those moments of caution slowly created distance between you. Silence filled the spaces where honest conversation might have clarified everything. At the time, silence seemed harmless. But now they see that it allowed uncertainty to grow. This realization became one of the most emotional parts of the letter. They were not only describing their feelings for you, but also acknowledging the ways fear had influenced their choices. Writing those words required humility because it meant admitting that the connection may have changed partly because they did not express what they truly felt when the opportunity existed. Yet there was also something healing about saying it honestly. For the first time, they were allowing themselves to recognize both the beauty of the connection and the mistakes that contributed to its distance. Another powerful thought appeared as they continued writing. They realized that the connection between you had never been defined by a dramatic ending. There was no clear moment when both of you agreed that the relationship was over. Instead, the communication gradually became less frequent. Messages grew shorter. Conversations happened less often. Life slowly pulled both of you in different directions until the silence felt normal. That kind of ending is often the most confusing because it leaves so many questions unanswered. Without a clear conversation about what happened, each person is left to interpret the silence in their own way. Your soulmate now understands that the assumptions they made during that time may not reflect the reality of what you were experiencing. Perhaps you also hesitated to speak openly. Perhaps you believed they preferred the distance. Or perhaps circumstances in your life made it difficult to continue the connection at that moment. The truth is that neither of you fully understood the other person's perspective because the conversation never happened. This realization is what gives the letter its emotional urgency. Your soulmate knows that time has passed and that life has likely changed for both of you. They are not writing in an attempt to return to the past exactly as it was. Instead, they are writing because they have finally reached a point where honesty feels more important than silence. The letter represents a moment of courage where they are choosing to acknowledge what the connection meant to them rather than pretending it was insignificant. Even if the words are never sent, writing them has already changed something inside them. It has allowed them to see the past with greater clarity and to recognize how meaningful experiences shape who we become. The connection you shared may not have followed the path either of you expected, but its impact remains real. By writing the letter, they are honoring that impact and allowing themselves to speak the truth that has been waiting quietly for so long. As the letter grew longer, your soulmate began noticing something surprising about their own emotions. What started as a simple attempt to express feelings had slowly turned into a deep reflection about everything that had happened between you. At first, they thought they were only writing about love or affection, but the more they wrote, the more they realized the letter was also about understanding. Understanding the past, understanding themselves, and understanding why the connection you shared had remained so vivid even after time had passed. Writing gave them the chance to step back and look at the entire journey from a different perspective. In everyday life, people rarely pause long enough to examine their emotions in this way. Responsibilities, conversations, work, and distractions keep the mind moving forward without giving much attention to deeper feelings. But when someone sits down to write honestly, the mind begins to revisit moments that once felt ordinary but now carry deeper meaning. That is exactly what happened to them as the letter continued. They remembered the small details of your conversations that once seemed insignificant but now felt important. The way you both laughed about things that others might not understand, the way certain topics turned into long discussions that lasted hours, and the quiet comfort that existed when neither of you felt pressured to impress the other. Those details reminded them that the connection had not been based on excitement alone. It had been built on understanding, patience, and curiosity about each other's thoughts. As these memories returned, they began realizing how much the connection had influenced the way they think about relationships today. Before meeting you, they may have believed that relationships were mostly about attraction or compatibility in simple ways. But through your conversations and shared experiences, they learned that emotional connection is something deeper. It is about feeling heard, respected, and understood without needing to constantly explain yourself. That realization stayed with them even after the connection between you became quieter. Whenever they met new people afterward, they noticed how different each interaction felt compared to what they once experienced with you. Some conversations were enjoyable but remained on the surface. Others had moments of depth but lacked the natural ease that once existed between you. Over time, they began to recognize that what you shared had quietly become a reference point for emotional honesty in their life. While writing the letter, this understanding made them pause for a moment. It made them question why they had waited so long to admit how meaningful that connection was. The answer, they realized, was not simple. Part of it was fear. When people feel something deeply, they often worry that expressing it might change everything. If the other person does not feel the same way, vulnerability can lead to disappointment. To avoid that possibility, many people choose silence instead. Silence feels safer because it protects the heart from immediate rejection. But silence also prevents clarity. That was one of the most difficult truths they faced while writing the letter. They realized that by choosing silence in the past, they had also chosen uncertainty. Instead of discovering the truth about how you felt, they allowed the connection to fade into assumptions. Those assumptions may have protected them temporarily, but they also left many questions unanswered. Now, sitting with the letter in front of them, they could see how much those unanswered questions had lingered in their mind over time. Another thought slowly appeared while they continued writing. They realized that the letter was not just about expressing love. It was also about acknowledging the role that timing plays in relationships. Sometimes two people meet at a moment when their lives are moving in different directions. Even when the emotional connection is strong, circumstances can create obstacles that make the relationship difficult to continue. At the time, those obstacles may feel confusing or frustrating. But with distance and reflection, it becomes easier to understand how timing influences many important experiences in life. Your soulmate now sees that the silence between you may not have been caused by a lack of feeling. Instead, it may have been shaped by uncertainty, personal challenges, or simply the fear of taking emotional risks. Understanding this does not erase the past, but it changes how they interpret it. Instead of viewing the connection as something that simply faded away, they now see it as something meaningful that paused before it could fully reveal its direction. This perspective is what gives the letter its emotional intensity. The words they are writing represent a moment when they are finally willing to face the truth about their feelings without hiding behind assumptions. They know that expressing those feelings may not change the present circumstances between you. Life has continued, and both of you may have grown in ways that lead to different paths now. But the purpose of the letter is not to control the future. It is to honor the truth of what once existed and to allow that truth to be spoken honestly. As they reach the later part of the letter, they begin to feel a quiet sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, they are not pretending that the connection was insignificant. They are acknowledging it openly and allowing themselves to appreciate the emotional lessons it brought into their life. Whether the letter is shared with you or remains private for a while, writing it has already changed something inside them. It has helped them see the connection more clearly and recognize the courage it takes to express feelings that have been hidden for so long. As the letter continued toward its final pages, your soulmate noticed that something inside them was changing in a quiet but meaningful way. At the beginning, writing had felt difficult, almost like opening a door they had kept closed for a long time. But as the words flowed, the weight they had been carrying slowly began to feel lighter. For months, perhaps even years, many of these thoughts had existed only in fragments inside their mind. They appeared during quiet moments, then disappeared again when life became busy. Now that those fragments were turning into complete sentences, they could finally see the full picture of what they had been feeling all along. It was not simply about love or missing someone from the past. It was about understanding how certain connections shape a person's emotional world in ways that remain long after circumstances change. While writing, they began to reflect more deeply on how the connection between you had influenced the way they see themselves. There were conversations you shared that challenged their thinking and encouraged them to look at life differently. At the time, those conversations may have felt like ordinary exchanges between two people who enjoyed talking. But with distance and reflection, they realized that those discussions helped them grow emotionally. You listened when they needed to explain something important. You questioned ideas in ways that made them think more carefully. You shared your own experiences in a way that created trust and openness. Those moments may not have seemed extraordinary while they were happening, yet together they formed a kind of emotional education that stayed with them. As they continued writing, they recognized that this was one of the main reasons the connection remained significant. It was not just about affection or attraction. It was about the way you both influenced each other's understanding of life. When two people help each other grow in that way, the connection becomes something deeper than a temporary relationship. It becomes part of the story of who they are becoming. This realization made the letter feel even more important. They understood that expressing these thoughts was not simply about reopening an old chapter. It was about acknowledging how that chapter shaped the person they are today. At the same time, another realization appeared quietly in their mind. They understood that while the connection had influenced them deeply, the future was still uncertain. Writing the letter did not guarantee that everything could return to the way it once felt. Time has a way of changing people's lives in ways that cannot be reversed. You may have discovered new goals, new relationships, or new paths that take you far from the place where the connection once existed. Your soulmate is aware of that possibility, and thinking about it brings both acceptance and vulnerability. Acceptance because they know that life continues moving forward for everyone. Vulnerability because admitting their feelings means acknowledging that the response may not be what they hoped for. Yet despite this uncertainty, they continued writing. The reason is simple but powerful. Leaving the words unspoken forever would mean continuing to live with the same unanswered questions that had been quietly present for so long. The letter represents their choice to face those questions honestly instead of avoiding them. Another thought began to shape the final part of what they were writing. They realized that the purpose of the letter was not to place pressure on you or to expect a specific outcome. Instead, it was about creating a moment of truth where both of you could understand what the connection meant from each perspective. For a long time, both of you may have been living with assumptions about how the other person felt. Assumptions are easy to create when communication fades, but they are rarely accurate. By writing the letter, your soulmate is choosing to replace assumption with honesty. They are acknowledging that the connection mattered deeply to them and that the silence between you never truly explained everything. As they approach the end of the letter, the words begin to feel calmer and more reflective. The emotional intensity that filled the earlier pages transforms into something softer. It becomes a recognition that meaningful connections do not need to last forever in order to be valuable. Some connections leave lasting lessons that remain important regardless of where life leads afterward. This understanding allows them to appreciate the past without trying to control the future. In the final lines they write, there is a sense of gratitude mixed with vulnerability. gratitude for the moments you shared and the ways those experiences helped them grow. Vulnerability, because expressing these thoughts requires trust that honesty is better than silence, even when the outcome is uncertain. By the time the letter is finished, your soulmate feels something they had not expected at the beginning of this process. They feel clarity. The act of writing has allowed them to see the connection not just as a memory, but as an important part of their emotional journey. Whether the letter is eventually shared with you or kept as a private reminder of their feelings, it represents a moment when they chose courage over hesitation and truth over silence. As they reached the final part of the letter, your soulmate paused for a long moment before writing the last lines. The room around them was quiet, and for the first time since they began writing, they allowed themselves to sit with everything they had just expressed. The pages in front of them held thoughts that had lived silently in their mind for a long time. Seeing those thoughts written clearly made the entire experience feel real in a way it never had before. It was no longer just a feeling that appeared occasionally in quiet moments. It had become something visible and honest. That realization created a mixture of emotions inside them: relief, vulnerability, and a deep sense of reflection about everything that had led to this point. Writing the letter had taken them through memories they had not revisited in such detail for a long time. Some of those memories brought warmth and appreciation, reminding them of the moments when your conversations felt effortless and genuine. Others brought a quiet sadness, because they now understood how easily meaningful connections can slip into silence when two people hesitate to speak openly. Yet even the sadness carried something valuable. It helped them see the past more clearly and understand how those experiences shaped who they are today. As they sat there reflecting, they realized that the letter had become more than a message for you. It had also become a message for themselves. It showed them that their feelings were real and worth acknowledging rather than hiding. For a long time they believed that keeping those emotions private was the best way to move forward. Now they understand that acknowledging them honestly is what actually allows a person to grow. When people avoid their feelings, those feelings often remain unresolved beneath the surface. But when they are expressed, even quietly on a page, they become part of a story that can finally be understood. This understanding created a new sense of calm inside them. The urgency that first pushed them to begin writing slowly transformed into something steadier. It was no longer a rush of emotion but a quiet awareness that this moment of honesty mattered. The idea that the letter expires in 5 minutes was never truly about time running out. Instead, it represented something more delicate, the brief window when courage is stronger than doubt. There are moments in life when people feel brave enough to say what they truly think, but those moments can fade if hesitation returns. Your soulmate knew that if they delayed too long, the familiar voice of doubt might convince them to hide these words again. That is why finishing the letter felt so important. It allowed them to capture the honesty of this moment before uncertainty had the chance to silence it again. As they read through the pages one more time, they began to think about what might happen next. Sharing the letter with you would require another step of courage. Writing it had already been emotionally intense, but sending it would mean allowing someone else to see the vulnerability contained within those words. That possibility made their heart race slightly. They understood that once the letter was shared, the outcome would no longer be within their control. You might feel touched, surprised, or even uncertain about what to say in response. You might be in a place in your life where the past feels distant and no longer relevant. All of those possibilities exist, and your soulmate knows that. Yet despite those uncertainties, they also recognize something equally important. If they never share the letter, the questions that inspired it will remain unanswered. The feelings will continue to exist privately, without ever having the chance to be understood from your perspective. That thought makes them realize that honesty, even when it carries risk, is still better than silence that leaves everything unresolved. In the final lines they wrote, there is no demand or expectation. Instead, there is sincerity. They express gratitude for the time you shared and acknowledge how much those experiences influenced their growth. They explain that the letter is not meant to change your life or pressure you into responding in a certain way. Its purpose is simply to tell the truth about what the connection meant to them. By writing those words, they are choosing transparency over assumption. They are allowing you to see the emotions that once remained hidden. When they finally set the pen down or finish typing the last sentence, your soulmate takes a deep breath and looks at the letter one final time. In that moment they feel something they did not expect when they began writing: peace. The act of expressing their feelings has given them clarity about the past and confidence about their own emotional honesty. Whether the letter reaches you immediately or remains private for a little while longer, it has already accomplished something meaningful. It has allowed them to face their emotions without fear and to appreciate the connection you shared for what it truly was, a chapter in their life that helped shape their understanding of love, communication, and vulnerability.